Thank you for being in this workshop. Process matters, how video game persuade us through procedurality and implications for composition and learning. And this workshop is meant to be an introduction. It's a very introductory lesson to procedural rhetoric and the tool we're going to use, Twine, which is and very useful engine for creating interactive and procedure-based narratives. And let me begin with a very brief introduction about myself. My name is Eva, and I'm interested in multimodal composition in interest-driven and informal contexts. That means affinity spaces. And I'm also a rhetoric person, so I'm interested in circulation studies on memes, how memes unfold itself and become rhetorical during its circulation. Outside academia, I am a gamer, apparently, and also I'm a Japanese manga and anime fan, as well as Korean webtoon fan. I also write fan fictions, so I'm a novelist. And this event, this workshop, is hosted by Infinity Game Lab at ASU. So if you're interested in knowing more about what we do, this is a link you can access. The entire PowerPoint is included in the Google Drive. You're more than welcome to access it. And also, if you want to stay connected with us, this is the Discord server you can join. All right. Let's begin with some warm-up questions. So I suppose we have many gamers here. And the question is, how is watching the game walkthrough on YouTube different from playing the game by yourself? Or alternatively, let me paraphrase the question in this way. If you can watch a full game walkthrough on YouTube, why would you still buy the game and play by yourself?
I think, oh, is that a question?
Yeah, sure. It's a question for everyone. Yeah.
Oh, actually, I want to ask, what's the point of watching people playing games? Like, I understand the joy of playing games yourself, although myself is not a big gamer, but what's the joy of watching someone playing games on YouTube?
Can anyone respond to that?
Well, I think that's a really great question. And I had exactly the same question before myself. But I think to me, and like Katie, I'm not really a huge gamer, but more like a game enthusiastic, I guess. So for me, I think watching someone else play is a way for me to get to know a game or get to know the gameplay without being intimidated by playing the game myself. And then also a way of learning more about a particular type of game before I get to know whether I like this particular genre of game or not. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. So if you want to play a game, you have to buy a decent computer in many cases, and you need to buy the game in order, well, theoretically speaking, you need to buy the game in order to enjoy the game. But with just watching people play, you can get to know how the game actually looks like and decide whether you like it. And sometimes there can be very experienced gamers who just play much better than you do. So in watching them play instead of playing by yourself, or watching their frustration, that happens too. Watching their frustration can also be a different way from like playing just by yourself.
I want to add on something. I think like most of the games that I play are non-linear, which means that like you triggered some situation when you hit a button, but like someone else may have a different, might encounter different scenarios. So you may want to see more cases and then watch somebody else playing the game and give you more scenarios to experience the game. Yeah.
Yes, there is a kind of, oh, Qing, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to provide like another perspective actually. So last week I had my class to watch a game because most of them are not players at all. So I discovered that like when you don't actually play games, you tend to overlook many details in the game. So like they cannot really discover like those, like when they ask them like, can you see any design principles that you can apply to your teaching, they don't really see it. They will just say like in very like general terms, like it's a vocabulary game. I don't really see the point of using it. So but there are many valuable points like they cannot see. So that's another thing. So you have to play by yourself.
So Qing, you are basically saying that if you are the actual players, you are held more accountable for the gameplay so that you are more engaged and more likely to find details hidden in the game that just by watching wouldn't be able to find. Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yeah. And responding to Man's point, I strongly agree. So there's a kind of game called sandbox game. It's like an open-ended world for you to explore, and you can decide which place you want to visit and who you want to talk to. So it is non-linear. That means everybody can have a very different processes of game walkthrough. So does that answer your question, Katie? Yeah.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Kind of. So any other thoughts on the question before I give you my thoughts? If no, let's continue.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Gamers. So if you play a game and if you watch people, other like more professional players play the same game, and you know that there are different routes, like you said, are you still going to go back and play the different options or alternatives? Do you still do that even if you know, okay, this is gonna work?
Good question. And I think that's a very critical and legitimate question to ask. And that ties in very well with the concept we're going to explore today. So imagine if you learn a trick from the YouTube video, and then you know it's going to work. And how is it still different from actually playing the game and doing the same thing in the game compared to just watching other people doing that on YouTube, right? So let me provide you with my thoughts on it. So the first point is, like we said earlier, different gamers, different processes of games, especially for nonlinear games, different routes, different endings. And the next point, I think it responds to your question very well. And this is an argument by Ian Bogus. A game is always incomplete, waiting for the input of a player, right? So the game, if just standing there, staying in your drive, and if you don't play it, then it's always incomplete. If you are the player, you need to think through and make decisions and take actions. And if you just watch video games on YouTube, you just watch other players' completion of the game instead of completing the game by yourself. Does it make sense to you, Katie? Okay. I know the explanation can be sort of abstract, so that's why our next step is I'll invite you to play a game developed by me. It's called a PhD mentoring session simulator. And so I developed this game in 2020, I think. So it's in the Google Drive folder. And let me show you. It's in this folder and it's here. It's called Twine game, a PhD mentoring session simulator. You can just download it and throw it. It's a HTML file. So you can throw it into any internet browser and it should work. It opens like this. I'll give you 3 minutes to download the game and play with it. All right. Thank you for playing through my game. That's actually I think the first complete game I've ever made. So question, as you play, do you think the game reflects the normal or what you believe should be the procedure of a PhD mentoring session? And secondly, what might be the argument of the game and why or how do you know?
I guess to answer your first question, for me, it's definitely not normal because of the kind of language that the game or the player uses in the game, which at least for me, that would not be something that I would want to talk with my advisor in person or even online. But I do have a question about your second question. So you're asking what might be the argument of the game. So what is an argument of the game? What do you mean by that?
So, okay, so to better phrase the question, what do you think is the attention of the game designer? Or what the game designer want to argue? Even though it's a very short game, it's a very mini game, but maybe the game designer is still trying to argue something.
It's trying to argue the PhD life is crazy.
And evidence?
Because it's crazy.
So for example, I think, how many of you find, go ahead.
Is this the game the same that you showed us a couple of years ago? You remember?
Yeah, I think so.
I remember that one. Yeah.
Yes, so I used this game during in Professor Green's digital multimodal method class. Yes. So yes, PhD life is crazy, and as you can probably tell, the avatar, quote unquote I in the game might be a heavy drunker, right? Alcoholic. Can you tell that? So let's see. Here's the evidence to play the game. So you're a doctoral student, and if you ask, "What? Am I a doctoral student?" and they ask, "Yes, you are." Don't pretend that you don't know. Jesus, are you drunk again? As you can see, capitalize again, saying that maybe this doctoral student is often drunk and not sober enough. Right. Right. Yes, PhD life is crazy. Any other potential arguments?
Maybe this is not a conversation between the student and mentor. Maybe this is just the inner conversation played out in the student's head because the student is so tortured that he or she has like two personalities.
Any, I love that interpretation, and any evidence for that?
I don't know, like maybe I do that.
See, so you can relate to your own experience through the same scenario simulated by this game. I would say maybe the last one, like, now tell me, who's the devil that prevents you from graduating? Myself, 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 still myself, right? So all the options here, it doesn't include the options about your advisor. It's just myself. So it looks very much like a self-blaming internal conversation with your other self. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think that very much reflects my feeling when I crafted this game. So thank you, Katie, for your interpretation. We do have a chat. Oh. All right. Thank you very much for the very productive and in-depth discussion of the game. And now let me give you an alternative way to make the argument, to make a very similar argument. So imagine this is the same argument, but presented not through the format of a game, but just through a paragraph. May I invite someone to read this paragraph aloud with emotions in it? Blanche, could you please help me?
Sure, I can certainly try.
Yeah. With emotions, remember, with emotions.
Okay, emotion. All right. Well, I am a doctoral student and an alcoholic. Right now, I am meeting my advisor, the devil who prevents me from graduating. He asked me about my research progress. I did not read any literature, nor attend any relevant conferences, nor did a pilot study. Instead, I have been seeing a not very handsome guy. The only thing that I can do is lying, and I am even bad at that. I feel guilty and sad and helpless. Maybe the actual devil preventing me from graduating is myself.
Thank you, Blanche. I can feel the despair as you read this aloud. I hope other people feel similar emotions running through the sentences. And here comes my next question. So how do you think the text, the paragraph I just give you, functions differently from the game, a PhD's mentoring session simulator? And how does the gameplay persuade or exert rhetorical influence on you in a way that the paragraph or the text cannot? Welcome back, everyone. So, all right, let me share my screen again. So, question: how do you think the paragraph here functions differently from the game simulator?
So we said in our group discussion that well, this is my take on the activity. The paragraph is pretty straightforward. You get all that information at once, and it's presented kind of in a chronological order, like
linear order. Yeah.
linear order, yeah. And whereas in the video, you kind of have to piece that information together. And sometimes you have to draw on your own background to make that assumption or to make that deduction. Yeah, but eventually you arrive at the same conclusion, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And Katie, here's a question for you to consider, because previously you asked how is watching the game through, like what's the point of playing a game by yourself after watching the game through? So you can imagine if I'm broadcasting my walkthrough of the game, how could that be different from you actually playing that game by yourself? All right, that's a very good start. So so Katie's point is by playing the simulator game, you have to piece the information together and fill some missing gaps and draw on your own experience. And the paragraph here is more straightforward and it's more like a monologue. Great. Any other points?
So I think I'm borrowing a theory that that's called ICAP. So in the ICAP theory, it has like differentiated learning into 4 different levels of engagement. And in here, the tags would be like you can regard it as an active level of engagement. When players are reading the tags, they're actively reading it, and like they are learning what the information conveys from this paragraph. It's active. But by playing the simulator, it's kind of like a constructive way of interaction. You're not only reading the tags on the simulator, you're also constructing by combining your own experiences with the assumptions from the text. So it's kind of a higher level of engagement than the active level. So I would assume like students might have a better experience or better like learning.
Immersion?
Yeah, like better learning effect if they play with the simulator, because it will like give them they immerse into the game more.
Yeah. So the keyword is immersion. I think it's at least safe to claim that the game simulator it simulates the situation for you in a more vivid manner for the player to step into the shoes of a doctoral student. While reading this paragraph is more like reading other people's story. But by playing the game, you have to be there and make decisions by clicking the options given by the game, right? So that I think it's better in terms of immersion effect, as if you are just the doctoral student. Great. Anything else?
So I guess for me, one thing I like about the gaming format over just reading the very linear paragraph format is the interactivity interactivity of the game, because you sort of feel like you're interacting, whether it's with the game or with your inner self or with your advisor or with another doctoral student. You're feeling that you're interacting because you are interacting with the game. So yeah,
even though your interaction was sort of calculated or projected or predicted by the game designer, but still it's a kind of interaction, right? So you input something and the game give you feedback instead of just reading the paragraph, and you can just skim through it, or you can read very closely, but we never know. But with video games, we can tell like how much engagement you have with that game by, for example, how well you play or how much you can take out of the game. Right?
Well, actually, can I offer something different? Like,
Sure.
I feel like if I read this paragraph, I'll be able to relate to that more, because in the games you're kind of forced to make decisions that are not likely. You're forced to choose either A or B, but I feel like in the real life I might just do C or D.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, so I think the paragraph's just kind of stating what's going on, and I can relate more to the paragraph instead of the game. Yeah, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. And also, can I interpret words in this way? Because Katie, you are a doctoral student and you strongly resonate with the story presented in this paragraph, and you are able to develop your own options or all the embodied experience associated with PhD mentoring session. So you sort of are mapping out or envisioning your own procedure or your own processes of a PhD mentoring session. Correct? Yeah, so that ties in very well with the concept we're going to explore next. That's mini lecture on procedurality and procedural rhetoric. So for the people who, I know we have education people here. So let me begin with the very brief introduction to rhetoric. Rhetoric is, even though it is often a stigmatized concept in modern world, like it often reminds us of how politicians lie and manipulate the mass, but actually it has its origin in ancient Greece and Roman. It's associated with ancient Greek and Roman orators and the practices of public speech. So in today's world and in academia, rhetoric is defined as generally as the art of persuasion through multiple modes of expressions, which is not limited to words, speech, texts. In other words, not limited to verbal ways of expression. So let me give you an example of nonverbal persuasion. So I suppose you have heard of the app Tinder. It's a dating app. Some people say it's a hookup app. I've never used it, so I don't know. But with Tinder, when you find potential matches, it will give you photos of that person. And usually there are no text on the photo, and you just decide whether you want to swipe left or swipe right to decide whether you want to reject the guy or accept the match. Right. So that kind of persuasion is nonverbal. It doesn't involve any text or words. You just look at the face and see if you like it. Another example of nonverbal persuasion is a doorknob. If you see a knob on the surface, I think you are likely to you feel the urge sort of to grasp the knob and maybe rotate it. Right? And if there is no doorknob on the door, you probably feel the urge to push it. Or if you see a handle on the door, you may feel like pulling it this way. And so that's another example of non-verbal persuasion. So that's rhetoric, the art of persuasion through multiple modes of expression. And next, let me give you some useful definitions about procedure rhetoric. So procedurality refers to a way of creating, explaining, or understanding processes. All the quotes comes from Ian Bogo's 2007. And procedure rhetoric is the practice of using processes persuasively, or more specifically, persuading through processes in a general and computational processes in particular. Ian develops the concept procedural rhetoric with the computer contexts. So I would say procedural rhetoric is closely associated with computer programs, but it doesn't have to be enacted through computers. So computer programs can use processes persuasively, but you can do that without a computer. For example, your mom, she can write you a note card telling you how to wash the dishes, showing you the processes of washing the dishes. And it's on a note card. It has nothing to do with digital device. Right? So I think it's an important point to make here is procedure rhetoric, it doesn't have to be enacted through computers. And procedure rhetoric afford a new and promising way to make claims about how things work. And it can be used persuasively, but it doesn't mean all processes are persuasive. So let me give an example. Let me give an example of the processes of passing the comp exam in my program. Katie, you are very familiar with that, right? So in order to pass the comp exam in the World program at ASU, you need to prepare 2 portfolio papers that are publishable. And then you need to prepare a bibliography of 50 to 70 texts entries, and then submit them all together as your portfolio to be evaluated by your committee members. And if you pass, you will proceed to the next step, the comp exam, which can be oral or written, blah, blah, blah. All right, I'll stop here. So right now, I just give you the processes of the comp exam. And is it persuasive? Does it persuade you into believing or thinking about anything? Maybe not.
Maybe not do a PhD at ASU.
Because it's complicated. Yeah. So I would say the processes, I just plainly state the processes for you. And if I want to make it more persuasive, I can show you the potential consequences of failing one of these steps. For example, I can tell you, if the portfolio you submit do not pass, then you will have to leave the program. You will lose all the scholarship and you won't have a PhD, and you will just graduate with a master's program, right? So if I show you the potential bad consequences of failing one of these steps, then maybe it becomes more persuasive. By showing you or revealing the consequences, I'm persuading you, well, maybe you should try harder with the process, right? So the point I want to make is procedure rhetoric is a practice of using processes persuasively. You want people to believe something, you want to influence people's opinions or perception of something, so that you review the processes of something in a particular way. All right, I know these concepts can be sort of abstract, and now let's talk about something more concrete. Oh, sure. So if you want to leave early, that's fine. And let's talk about, the game Frostpunk. How many of you have heard of this game? Okay, none of you. It's okay. So Frostpunk, it's a very famous and controversial game, and it's a city building and survival game. There's nothing special about that. But what makes it unique and controversial is the game has moral or ethical game mechanics. In order to survive, it asks you to make very difficult choices. So let me show you the video.
To create, consume, repeat. We're taking a look at Frostpunk, a city building survival game set in an alternate 1886, where you control one of the last cities on Earth in the face of a never-ending winter.
What happens if the engine stops? We all
As an avid gamer, I'm no stranger to top-down city building resource management games. But where Frostpunk sets itself apart is the addition of a moral/ethical game mechanic that requires a player to establish laws that govern society's working conditions, healthcare, and food provision. As you can imagine, governing a society pushed to the brink of extinction presents dilemmas that have no real easy answer. And if I'm being honest, oftentimes I found myself making evil, amoral decisions because they granted my society the greatest chance of survival. Take the following, for example. Number 1, do I enact a law mandating 24-hour work shifts or let the masses rest?
Get back to work, Stuart.
Number 2, turn a blind eye to child labor and unsafe working conditions. Number 3, put sawdust in the food to increase the food rations and possibly make people sick.
Sir,
Number 4, allow people the dignity of burying their dead or just stockpile their bodies in the snow like popsicles.
All right, everyone. Chill.
These are but a few of the many problems you contend with in Frostpunk. And as dark as those sound, I can assure you they only get worse due to your dependency on the giant coal-hungry heat generator in the center of town, unpredictable weather fluctuations, and the ever-changing temperament of the people.
Don't be so melodramatic. You know everyone has their own preordained position.
This unflinching commitment to dark subject matter by developer 11-Bit Studios makes this game truly special. That said, the game's steep learning curve may put some players off, but I suspect even that decision to not handhold was intentional by the developer. Who would have thought breaking one's will could be so much fun and educational?
All right, I'll pause here. I think you have a general idea of what kind of tough choices you will have to make. And this is what makes the game really famous or infamous. This is the ending scene if you survive the game for many players, because they make tough choices or immoral choices. The game would eventually ask you, but was it worth it? The city survived, but was it worth it? So I would say players, they are provoked by this ending scene. And let's look at a typical Steam review for the game. I provide a translation for the game, for the review. So it basically says, I play this game in the most difficult mode, 0 death of villagers, except the ones killed by the story. And I rescue every single person I could. In the end, but was it worth it? And the player goes like, F you. It was worth it, because only living people could complain. So that's a very strong emotional reaction to the ending scene here. And let's look at another more detailed, and I would say more revealing review of the game. Since our audience is here, many of you know Chinese, so I'll let you read the Chinese version first. All right, so a quick summary, this is a long review. So a quick summary is the player is saying, I try my best to build a utopia in the doomsday, but in the end, in order to survive and beat the game, I had to lower the moral standards and do cruel things, really, really cruel things. So here is the English version. And I won Blanche, could you please read aloud from the beginning, and we will sort of close read this review and see what this review could offer us about the details or procedure in the game. All right.
Okay, so sorry, I need to move the window a little bit. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
Read
all at
sentence one by one, and we will stop somewhere in the middle. Yeah.
Okay. So this game is cruel. 24 hours is always better than 8 and 10 hours. Child labor is definitely more useful than those poor hold values provided by child shelters. I tried several times to build a doomsday utopia. No emergency shifts, no child labor, no sawdust in soups and meals, a cemetery instead of snow pits, and I insisted on bringing back every survivor I found on the snowfield. But that game cannot go on. It's inefficient. There is a shortage of resources, a shortage of labor, and a shortage of food.
Okay,
The
let's
game
pause
is
here. Maybe pause here for a second. All right. So I think here we can see some potential processes in a game, right? So you can choose among 24 hours emergency work shift or 8 or 10 hours. And it basically says it's always 24 hours is always better than 8 and 10. So the player is making a clear judgment of how efficient each option can be. And it says child labor is definitely more useful than putting them in a shelter. So again, it's explaining the processes, like child labor would yield more, would be more productive for survival. Right? And then explains alternative path of building a utopia and failed. Right. And all right, can we continue the reading from here? Because this is the most creepy sentence I could tell from this review.
So snow pits can preserve corpses, including their internal organs, but cemeteries cannot. This is the.
This is the. Go ahead.
Oh, this is the catastrophe for the living, not for the dead. I have to lower my moral standards so that these poor people can survive.
All right, let me stop here. Thank you. Thank you, Blanche. All right, so this sentence gives me the crib. Snow pits can preserve corpses, including their internal organs. And why would they want to keep the internal organs?
To eat.
That's true.
Food.
Yes, that's true. I would say that's the darkest part of the game. I think the developer actually modified that part, but in its previous version, it is allowed. If the people starve for a long time, and you will find such an option to consume the corpses as a source of food. That's really, really creepy. And it shows you such an option exists. So the reason why I'm showing you this very detailed and long review, because I find this review to be revealing. It tells you or shows you the reason why the player eventually opt to be someone this player hates him or herself, to be an evil person, to be an immoral sort of dictator or ruler who has very low moral standard. And in the end, the game would ask you, but was it worth it? If your people survived by consuming corpses, was it worth it? Did you cross the boundary and become no longer human in order to survive? So what's the difference between savages and your people? That kind of thing. So I'm choosing Frostpunk here as an example to show, because I think this game it unfolds the procedure of survival in the doomsday in a very, very vivid manner. And instead of just accusing actions like child labor or sawdust in the food or 24 hours work shifts, it puts you in the position to understand why such thing exists and why it should exist, or not should, but why they exist, because you need to survive, right? So I think it's very persuasive, especially in the end. The game ends with a reflection question. Was it worth it? Coercing players into thinking about the entire processes they have been through. Right? So that's a very vivid example of procedural rhetoric. And next, another example. I think this one is something where some of you might be more familiar with. This War of Mine. Unlike most war games in which players are put into the shoes of a soldier to fight, to kill, and in most games like that, if you die, you just respawn, get reborn, and just re-enter the battlefield as if death is no big deal. But in this game, this War of Mine, it shows you how civilians, that's not soldiers, civilians survive in the war zone. So in this game, you basically have to, people come back to the barter economy. You trade things with things, not with currency or money. You hide and stay in bombarded buildings. You need to cook and feed yourself. You need to keep yourself warm. And the very interesting part of this game is there are two kinds of forces in the game. And the game proves in a very vivid way that ideology does not matter at all, because no matter who you choose to side with, they do very similar things. They kill, they steal, they rob, and maybe they even butcher. So since we talk more about Frostpunk, I would be more concise with this War of Mine. And let's skip this question. So now I want to give you some personal responses to the question about the differences between the simulator game and the paragraph. And I'll cite more details from Boga's book to respond to that. So procedural representation takes a different form other than written or spoken representation. It explains process with other processes. And this is how the PhD mentoring session simulator works. I explain the process of a mentoring session with processes, with all the options I give you, with the walkthrough of the game, right? So that's explain process with other processes. And also procedural representation itself requires inscription in a medium that actually enacts processes rather than merely describing them. So it's important to understand that describing processes and actually presenting people with the process that they can go through, those are two different things. And the difference is exactly similar to playing the game by yourself and watching the game videos on YouTube, right? So I would say the game explains the process with process. And also I use Twine, this is something we'll explore later, as the game engine is a medium that enacts processes. And next one, talking about the point on game is always incomplete, waiting for players' input. I would cite, Boga's cite Aristotelian enthymeme to compare and contrast. So this is a technique in which a proposition in a syllogism is omitted, and the listener is expected to fill the missing proposition and complete a claim. This is what Katie said earlier about you have to piece the information together by yourself. So let me give an example. Be nice to America, or we will bring democracy to your country. So something is omitted here. It is omitted that democracy is something we will bring if you are not nice to us, and it probably implies the so-called democracy is not a good thing. But yeah, this has been a very sarcastic manner. So like I said, the player needs to perform a great deal of mental synthesis, filling the gaps between subjectivity and the game processes. And this is what exactly I'm doing in the game. So by saying, let me show you. Oops. So the game asks you, you're a doctoral student. And if you say, what? Am I a doctoral student? and they ask you to get yourself together. So you click it, and then here comes the most interesting I would say option here. Ask you to punch yourself in the face. Instead of just showing the action or describing it, I set it as an option, or actually it's the only option you have. So you have to click it, and the very act of clicking this text, it sort of simulates the action of punching the player, him or herself, in the face, right? So let's come back to PowerPoint. Where were we? So that's the part about amphetamine. All right, next one. And also, Bogus argues that we typically understand procedures as established, entrenched ways of doing things, but we tend to see procedurality when we challenge it. I think that's the very message I'm trying to deliver in the game I design, because I'm raising objections. By showing what a mentoring session procedure should not look like, I'm arguing the kind of challenges or obstacles that all doctoral students could face in the game. So I would say the game does provide a flourishing community of conversation, because by talking about, the game could provoke people into talking about, so what a normal or what a mentoring session should look like. And that kind of conversation could be productive and relevant. All right, here comes a discussion question. So what's the implication of procedural rhetoric for learning and education? This is a question for all of you. How can you use procedural rhetoric in your context? And what kind of activity or writing projects can you envision with the concept procedural rhetoric? I'll give you some food to begin with. For example, you can use Twine to craft your own narrative video game, or you can use Twine procedural rhetoric to explain certain procedures to students. For example, you can turn your syllabus policy into a Twine game, procedures for applying for an extension. And also you can ask your students to use Twine to craft interactive arguments in certain contexts for certain audiences. And so now I want to give you some time to consider how can you use procedural rhetoric in your context.
I don't really have any specific thought at the moment, but I do, because I'm not really familiar with Twine, not yet, but I am curious to know how, because I am trying to, I guess for my dissertation, I'm trying to design a game that's sort of inspired by escape rooms. And I think maybe, you know, using Twine or even using some of the concepts that we talked about today would
I think the concept is more important. Yeah, because Twine is just one possible tool to use, but procedural rhetoric can be a more useful concept. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that could be a potential, you know, relevant concepts, but I'm still trying to figure out how exactly that I can make the connection there.
What about Matt?
I'm looking at your slide, but what we discussed, Blanche and I discussed about how to use the concept, the procedure rhetoric concept in the context of science education, science learning. And we, both of us had like different examples. So Blanche mentioned like a process, it's more like a procedure knowledge of science, such as asking students to doing a lab, like a chemistry lab, and explaining each procedure, each step, and give them examples and the specific instructions on how to do like the chemistry lab using the Twine. This might be a good way of applying this technology into the lab kind of science learning. But my example is kind of different from her. I give an example of using the using Twine or the procedure rhetoric to explain a emergent process. Like this is not, it's also a science concept, a science process concept, but it's different from the lab concept because it doesn't really emphasize on the steps of how to do the experiment. It's more emphasizing on understanding the underlying mechanisms which give rise to the emergent process. So by applying this tool, we think it might be possible for helping students understand the concept of diffusion or the concept of natural selection better, because they always not, people are not like, they are not able to see the process, because natural selection, we all know it happens over many generations. But if you decompose that concept into like the specific unit of time by using this tool, so students might be able to understand the causal mechanisms. Yeah, that's what I thought. It's really not really tied to the example you gave, but
no, I think it's a very good example, and I think I can tell it ties to your context very well. So if you want to teach students about concept of the process of natural selection, you can explain the process to them, and in the end, you can ask them to sort of create like a procedurality, create a procedure for natural selection. You can ask them to sort of like maybe visualize that process with Twine or with other tools. So by requiring or asking them to articulate the process, it really proves they understand the process really well.
Yeah, because like oftentimes in textbooks, the process is hidden. So students reading the text, they still don't understand what happens and what makes the changes to happen for natural selection per se.
Exactly. So that's a good thing about procedurality. It exposes or reviews the process in a very transparent manner. Yeah. Awesome. All right, we don't have much time, so we will talk about the next time. The workshop part, make something with Twine for your context. And so, all right, so our tool, oh, by the way, the game, the PhD mentoring session simulator, that game I crafted with Twine. And it has web page version available. So it's available across all platforms, whether you are using Mac or Windows, either way would be fine. And here I give you a full tutorial. I think the tutorial is very comprehensive. It covers almost everything. Originally the plan is giving you 20 to 30 minutes to actually craft an arguments with Twine and share your game with us. Upload your game Google Drive folder. But I changed the plan. I think let's do this. So you have the Google Drive folder, and if interested, you can watch the full tutorial, learn about Twine and how to do things with it. And then when you are done, like after this workshop, when you are done, you can drop the folder, you can drop your game into the folder, and maybe we can have the next session discussing what you have got out of this workshop. All right. So yeah, that's and also I give you further resources if you're interested in procedural rhetoric and you want to read more about it. Here's a video on it. It's a speech by Ian Bogus, Professor Bogus. And also there's a book chapter that I include in the Google Drive folder. It's here, reading. So feel more than welcome to read it. And if you want to drop your game, you can drop it here. All right. Thank you very much for attending today. And I'll see you next time. And I look forward to playing your Twine game.